Okay, so Google Forms. I think usually the best way to learn about anything is just to kind of get stuck into it, and let's actually build a form to see some of the options that are available to us. But just starting with the basics, because there were a couple of people who have never created a Google form, according to that poll at the start. How do you create a Google form? How do you get into it? So there's various different ways, but essentially, if you are in any Google application, like Gmail or Calendar or Google Drive or something, you'll see this little 9 dots menu for Google Apps. And one of those is Forms. So if I click on Forms, that's going to open up a little interface with forms that I've been using recently, and also the option to create a blank form. I could also, if I'm in Google Drive, I could just click on New Google Form, and that's going to create a new one as well. By default, it will save it to your My Drive in Google. So all Google Forms are saved in Google Drive somewhere. Maybe that you want that to be on a shared drive instead, in which case you can move it afterwards, or you could just navigate to the drive or folder you want it to be in, and then hit New Form, and it'll be saved within there. Just be aware, if it's on a shared drive, it will be shared with everyone who has access to that shared drive, and they would be able to edit the form as well and see responses. Or one final way, which is a little tip, if I type forms.new in Google Chrome in a new tab, that's going to immediately create me a blank Google form. That's probably the quickest way to do it. So let's do that. And we can see straight away, I'm here in an editable version of a Google form. So you can switch between edit view and kind of a preview mode if you're wanting to see what the end user will see of your form. And you can do that over here with a little preview icon that looks like an eye. If I click on that, it's going to show me exactly what someone's going to see when they fill in the survey, which is not very much at the moment because I've not really added my question. First things first, let's give my form a title. Let's call it All About Cheese, because I'm going to ask some questions about cheese, because that's a personal interest of mine. Form description, you can add a little bit more detail about your form. You might want to tell people how the data is going to be used, things like that. So in this case, I'm just going to write, please let us know your opinions on cheese. Okay, actually, let's get rid of that exclamation mark. Let's make it a bit more professional. Okay, so that's the title of the form, which people will see when they're filling it in. Also up here, you see it says untitled form. Well, there's kind of two titles to a form. There's this one, which people will see when they fill it in, and then there's this one, which is the name of the form in Google Drive. So that is the one you would use when you're trying to find it if you're searching for a particular form that you own in Google Drive. If I click here, it's probably going to change that to be the same, but they don't have to be the same. I could call that cheese 28 November. If I've got loads of cheese surveys, that's going to help me figure out which one that is. And the user filling in won't see that. That's just the title for me and anyone else who's editing it. So we've got our title, we've got our description. Let's start adding some questions. So you'll see here, this is basically a question block. And what do I want to do first of all? Well, let's just write what my question is. Do you like cheese? Quite a simple one to start with. And I need to figure out what kind of question it's going to be. So in Google Forms, you've got a reasonably long list of question types you can use. Could use short answer. That's just going to let people enter whatever text they want. Paragraph, obviously the same, but a bit longer. There's a few options that we will cover today. But I think multiple choice is going to be best for this, because there's really only two options. There's yes and there's no. Multiple choice options are good if you're wanting your data to be easily analyzed and categorized into groups. If I left that as short answer, you might have all kinds of responses. People might say, I like it a lot, or yes, I do, and yes, and they will all come out as different responses. Whereas if I restrict it to that, There's only two options. I'll be able to get easy graph showing me a breakdown, how many said yes, how many said no. And I'll also be able to send people to different bits of the survey through branching logic, which I will come on to. Right, I'm happy with that question. How do I add another one? Well, you'll see to the right of the question block, there's a few options in this little menu. You can add image or video to your form if you really want to. You can import questions from elsewhere, or you can add a question. I'm just going to add a question here. And I'm going to ask, what is your favorite type of cheese? There is a little bit of formatting I can do in here if I want, for example, cheese to be italicized, favorite to be bold. Could stick a link in there to something if you want to link out to any information. Favorite type of cheese. So I could do multiple choice and I could start listing all the cheeses I can think of, but really that's going to take me forever, isn't it? And people are going to have to scroll through a long list. I could choose drop down, and that'll give me a drop down menu, which is if you do have a really long list of multiple choice options, that might be something to consider. So people then just have a little drop down menu that appears when they click on it, and then they can search through the options. You're probably familiar when you have to choose what country you live in, then you have to scroll all the way down to UK, or figure out what it happens to be called on that day. Sometimes England, Great Britain, so on. So this time I don't want multiple choice though. I'm just going to do short answer because there's probably types of cheese I've never even heard of. Do I want to make the question required is something to think about. Now that is basically whether people have to answer it or not, whether it's a required question. I should have probably toggled that on for this question because that is essential. I really need to know whether people like cheese or not. That one though, I'm going to leave that optional. As a general rule, only make something mandatory if you really need people to answer it for the purposes of your data. There's nothing more irritating than going through a survey and not being able to leave something blank if you want to. But yeah, I'm happy with that question. Let's add another. Let's say, how many times a week do you eat cheese? Again, I could have multiple choice and start listing 1, 2, 3. I don't know what's a reasonable number of times a week people might be eating cheese. So multiple choice, probably not the best option here. I could choose linear scale and go up sort of 1 to 10. It's not going to allow me to go above 10 though. And that's more when you're kind of rating your feeling or opinion on something that option type tends to be used. So I'm actually just going to leave that as short answer text for now. Right, so I've got favorite type of cheese, how many times a week you eat cheese. But what about those people who don't like cheese? We need some questions for them. Let's add a new question. And let's say, why don't you like cheese? Multiple choice should be fine here. So let's say, don't like the taste, gives me bad dreams, too smelly. And then if you want another option for people to say other and be able to add, their own text, just click add other, and you see that's gonna be another option, but it's going to allow them a little bit of a short answer response within that question as well. Actually, with this question, do I want multiple choice? Because some people might want to choose more than one of these. And we intuitively know when we see these kind of circular radio buttons, that means you can only choose one option. In Google Forms, checkboxes is a different type of question. And again, when we see that kind of box, intuitively we know, all right, well, I can tick more than one. There might be that I want to tick all 3 of those. So in this case, I'm going to go with the checkbox question. Okay, I'm going to keep it as not required. Another thing to mention, as well as the menu over on the right here, you've got little options along here. So you might want to duplicate a question. If you've got some very similar questions, you might not want to add it from scratch every time. I might want to duplicate that question. I might want to say, why don't you like chocolate? In that case, I've duplicated it and then I've edited it. I can move questions around. All you need to do, hover over this bit near the top, click and drag. I might want that right at the top. Or I might think, actually, I don't want that question at all. That's got nothing to do with cheese. Let's just choose delete question, which is here. So that gives you some control over your questions. Let's add one more question at the bottom. Oh, need to move that down. Let's move that one up there. How would you rate vegan cheese? So because this one's a rating, I think it's noticed that I've used the word rate. Google Forms will sometimes give you what it thinks the question type should be based on what you've typed for the question text. It might even give you some suggested options. Feel free to ignore those, but sometimes it's helpful. So I'm going to choose linear scale. I'm not going to use 1 to 5 because if I do that, everyone's just going to put 3. Everyone's just going to put the one in the middle. I'm going to make it out of 6 just to be a bit difficult. Labels, do I need labels? Probably do, because does 1 mean you like it a lot, or does 1 mean you don't like it? Let's say 1 is dislike and 6 is like very much. And let's make that one required. Okay. In terms of other question types, we're not going to go into any more in any detail. Most of them fairly self-explanatory, like date and time. That's only going to allow specific date and time options. Multiple choice grid is obviously the same as multiple choice, but you can have it, you can have people choosing multiple things in a grid. Same with tick box. Rating is a new one, which allows people to kind of give a star rating. Oh, just move so the light comes back on. There we go, we have light again. File upload. If you want people to be able to upload a file in response to something, for example, an example of their work or a CV, if it was something they were applying for, you can choose a file upload question. Just be aware that question type's not available if your form is stored on a shared drive, just because that's one of the quirks of Google. So if you ever see that grayed out and you're wondering why, check if the form's stored on a shared drive. There's workarounds. You can move it out of a shared drive. You can still share forms with people even if they're not in a shared drive. But yeah, let's leave that one for now. Let's preview our form again. So it's asking me if I like cheese. Let's say yes. What's your favorite type of cheese? What is my favorite type of cheese? Let's say Stilton. How many times do you eat cheese? 3, let's say. Why don't you like cheese? Well, I do like cheese. There's nothing more annoying than seeing a question that doesn't apply to you on a form. So I want this form to not show me that question. I want the form to be clever enough to know which questions it should show people. If someone's chosen no, and they don't want to then be asked what their favorite type of cheese is, or how many times a week they eat it, because they don't like it. So let's switch back into edit mode. If you're in preview mode, you can always get back to edit mode by going to this pencil icon in the bottom right, clicking on that to go back to edit mode. So what I need is to split this form out into sections and send people to different sections depending on their answers to different questions. So that is where, again, there's an option in this menu to add section. Okay, so I want a section that is specifically for cheese lovers. And I want that section to contain the questions people will only answer if they like cheese. I don't want that question to be in there. Do you like cheese? I want everyone to answer that. So that'll be in the first section. But then in the second section, I'll have this: what's your favorite type of cheese and how many times a week do you eat it? But then I want this section: why don't you like cheese? I want that to be a cheese haters section. You can see sometimes I'm creating these sections. The questions aren't where I want them to be. So again, I just drag that down into the relevant section. And then last section, I want everyone to answer this question. How would you rate vegan cheese? So I'll call that just the final section. And I'll move that question down into there. If you want to move sections around, reorder the sections, that you'll notice there's no way to click and drag them. So you just have to click on the 3 dots next to one of the sections and change move section. Then you can change the order of them there. Or equally, you can delete them or merge them, duplicate them, and so on. Okay, so now if I preview the form, you'll see it's putting each section on a different page, but it's still showing me every section, no matter what I click. So I need to have a look at this more options menu, because for this question, do you like cheese? I want the people who answer yes to go to the cheese lovers section, and I want the people who answer no to go to the cheese haters section. So if I click on more options, you'll see for multiple choice questions, you can use this feature that's go to section based on answer. Okay, so I've selected that, and it's asking me what I want to happen for each option. So if it's yes, I want them to go to the cheese lovers section. If they answer no, I want them to go to cheese haters. There we go. Now you'll notice if I click on this question, what's your favorite type of cheese? And click on more options. I don't see that go to section based on option because that's short answer text. Wouldn't be possible. It needs to be multiple choice with a restricted range of options to be able to use branching logic from a question. Let's see whether that's working. Let's preview the form again. So do you like cheese? So this time if I select no, right, it's jumped me straight to cheese haters. So that's great. What if I type yes? What if I select yes? Yep, it's taking me to cheese lovers. Answer those questions. Ah, but I'm still seeing cheese haters, which isn't ideal. So what am I going to do about that? Because if you look here, I can tell it which section to go to next, but I can't say, oh, once you've been on that section, then skip this section and so on. It's limited in how much branching logic I can do there. So what I actually want to look at is this. So at the end of each section, it will say, after section 2, where do you want people to go? So at the moment, it's the default, which is continue to the next section. But I don't want people to do cheese lovers section and then cheese haters. I want them to skip straight to the final section. After that, and cheese haters, that's fine. They can continue to next section because that is the final section anyway. Back into preview. Do you like cheese? Yes. Answer these questions. And then it's jumped me straight to the last question. So that's all working great. You'll see I'm switching in and out of preview a lot, and that's kind of a key aspect to when you're building a form. Test it out as much as possible, get colleagues and friends to test it, and keep having a look at how it appears to the end user in preview mode, especially if you've got branching logic like that. There is one other thing I want to change, because how many times a week do you eat cheese? I could write absolutely loads. And it's going to accept that answer because it's just a short answer style question at the moment. But I'm not sure I want people to be able to write something like that, because that's not going to give me good data. I want it to be a numerical value. So how can I do that? Well, let's go to that question. How many times a week do you eat cheese? So I'll keep it as short answer, but again, if I click on more options, another thing I can do is choose response validation. So if I click on that, that is going to give me some options to validate the data that people can enter in response to that question. Or in kind of more plain English, you can restrict what they can choose in response to that. And you can do that in various ways. It might be that you say, right, I want to make sure they can't write more than 20 characters. I don't want them waffling on. I might want it to be text, which is a valid email address. But this time I want it to be a number. And I could say I want it to be between 0 and 20 or something like that. But actually, again, I don't necessarily want to restrict how many times people can answer, how many times people eat cheese, but I do want it to be a whole number. Decimal answers to that question would not make sense. So make that a whole number. Now let's see how that works now. So I choose yes. Now if I type absolutely loads, yeah, you can see it's not letting me progress in the form, and it's giving me that warning message, must be a whole number. If I choose 2.5, it's still telling me the same thing. If I choose 6, then it's happy. So I'm restricting what people can enter to that question to make sure my data is going to be useful. And how would you rate vegan cheese? Yeah, there's no middle option, so it's forcing me to actually think about it rather than just go straight down the middle. I'm going to say number 4 for that. And you can see how useful the labels are. Right, and now I'm going to submit that. Okay. So there we are. I've built a Google form. There's some other things I might want to edit about my form. Now, I might want to change how it looks. And I can do that up here. If I go to customize theme, I can choose which font I use for different sections of it. I could choose this font if I really wanted to. What we would say, if possible, use a sans serif font, so one without kind of twiddly bits, just because that's a lot better for accessibility if you can use a plain font rather than a serif font. So let's choose Arial, that's a nice plain one. For the questions, I'll use Calibri, but I'll make it a bit bigger. You can customize that as much as you want. You could choose a header image if you wanted to jazz it up a bit. You could use an image that you have. You could, upload an image of your own, or you can use one of these preset themes. I happen to know that in the food and dining section, there's a cheese one. I mean, look, some of these are even moving, quite fancy. But I'm going to choose the cheese and wine one. And when I insert that header, you see that's appeared at the top. It's also changed the color scheme to match that image, but I can refine that as well if I want to. I might want to choose this color, and I might want to make the background that color. It's picked out colors from this image, but again, I could choose a completely different one. If I clicked on add custom color, I could make it bright green if I wanted. But I think I'll stick with the cheesy color. Okay. So that's customizing the look and feel. You can add images and video within your form as well if you want to. And yeah, last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a collaborator to this form. And I don't want to use send. So I'll use send when I send the form out for people to fill it in. What I want to do is add someone else. In fact, I want to add John specifically to be able to edit this form. Now, just be very careful if you do this. Make sure you want the person to be able to edit the form. Make sure you want them to be able to see all the responses as well. But if I click on the 3 dots and then choose add collaborators, and then I will choose, I'll type in John's non-personal account. Give him edit access. I could type a little message there if I really wanted. Cheese form. And send. Then, when I hand over control to John, he should have full access to the back end of this form as well. So I will stop sharing my screen now and hand over.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I've got that trees form in my inbox ready to go. Just while I start sharing my screen and I start demoing a bit of the settings and the back end of Google Forms, I want to say that Simon is showing there some really good practice, some good best practice when form designing, when form editing. As you could see, he was going in and out in the preview, making sure that everything worked well, that everything in terms of the logic was making sense, testing each scenario, because sometimes we've had forms before where they've gone out to people and, you know, logic doesn't quite work, it gets overly complex and things break. So making sure that we're testing as we go along. We see these common faux pas as well where people are using the wrong type of multiple choice. They want to restrict people to one option, but they've accidentally given them multiple checkboxes and suddenly the form doesn't make sense. We've seen the opposite where people, they want people to be able to choose more than one thing, but they've got radio buttons, so they're restricted to just one thing. And always the way around this is, again, sharing it out to your peers, testing it yourself, but testing it with other people so you got an extra set of eyes on it. Okay, so everyone should be able to see Simon's cheese form here on screen. Now, we're living here in the questions tab temporarily, but we're going to actually now have a little look at the settings and look at how this form behaves when we send it out in the world. And this is really important in terms of data sharing, but in terms of what we're allowing our users to do, because everything in terms of form design comes down to really making it as easy as possible for people to fill in. We could add here perhaps even a bit of a note on how long we think the survey is going to take. We could test it, filling it out, and say it's going to take 5 to 10 minutes. Allow people that kind of that understanding of how long it might take before they end up on a 30-minute journey about cheese. Anyway, I'm going to pass over to our settings area here, and let's have a look at what we can toggle around here. So the first option I've got here is make this a quiz. So if you're wanting to start a Zoom pub quiz, then this is a great option, but it's going to really change how your form behaves altogether. You can select correct answers to things, you can set scoring systems, but it's no longer a survey, it's a quiz. So once you hit that button, be aware that it's going to muck up your form if you don't want it to be a quiz. I'd say if you're building a quiz, just hit that straight off the bat and then build your form. It's much easier to do it that way. The next group of settings are going to live under the responses tab. So I'm going to hit this drop down arrow here and see everything I can do in terms of managing how responses are collected and crucially how they're protected. So the first option I've got is collect email addresses. Now you could just add a question that says, what's your email address? And stick in some validation to get a correct email address. But the cleaner way, and I would say the best practice way, is to use this option here, collect email addresses. By default, this is set to do not collect. This is set to be an anonymous survey. Okay. Now, if I click on that drop down, I've got 3 options. I've got do not collect, I've got collect verified email addresses, and collect responder input. Let's have a look at verified first of all. What verified does is, as it says here, respondents will be required to sign into Google, and it's verifying their email address against the Google account they're signed in at. So if you click this option here, then it's going to prompt people to sign into Google. So if you're sharing this externally, be aware that this is going to get them to sign into Google. So if you know that they're not using Google accounts, this could be a little bit annoying for them. Our other option is responder input, okay? And as it says here, respondents will manually enter their email response. So let's show you what verified looks like for now. I'm going to toggle that on. I'm going to preview my form. It looks like this. It gives them a checkbox. Because I'm signed into Google, record this email address to be included with my response. And it's mandatory. I've got no option. If I don't do that, then it's going to tell me, sorry, no cheese survey for you. Let's come back out of that preview. And let's have a look at what responder input looks like. And preview this. Slightly different, we've now got the option to just put in our email address. And if I just put in cheese, must be a valid email address. It needs to be cheese@gmail.com. So it's not checking all, if it's an actual email address that exists in the world, it's looking for that at something york.com york.ac.uk at gmail.com at outlook.com and so on. So again, a couple of options there, just be aware of what they do. Now, when we enable either of these collection methods, it also gives us an option to send responders a copy of their response. And we've got a couple of options here. When requested, so what this will do is it gives them a little button at the end of the form that says, give me a copy of my responses. So if you've done a sign up for, your dinner and someone wants to double check, did they pick chicken nuggets or pizza? They can have that response in their email inbox. Or you could, if you pick always, force it. It's a bit weird. I've not really seen many forms doing that. But again, if you want to have make sure that there is a copy of this in someone's inbox for if there's any conflicts later down the line, you can do that so that we know it's gone into their inbox. Okay. For now, because I'm going to share this form in the chat later, I'm not going to collect email addresses because I don't want to share all your email addresses whilst we're on Zoom. That would be going against my good data rules. Next option we've got is allow response editing. So this is a toggle on and off. Responses can be changed after being submitted. So if this is off, you're saying you've got one shot at this form and there's nothing else you can do if you change your mind and you want pizza rather than chicken nuggets. Bad luck. If we toggle it on, then it will give them a little button at the end to say they can submit another response, but they can actually go back into this form and change their previous responses. Now, if this is linked to a Google Sheet, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, then what will happen is the data you collected from the original response will be in the sheet, but it will, in the cell where that previous response has been changed, it will bounce up a little comment. It will have a little note in that cell to say, this has been changed, okay? So be aware that that can affect some of your data collection, but it does indicate for you. You have to kind of, be perceptive to spot it. Again, I'm just going to keep that off for now. These next two options require people to sign into Google to allow them. The first is to restrict to users in the University of York and its trusted organisations. So if you want to limit responses to just at york.ac.uk accounts, then again, we can toggle that. So respondents will be required to sign into Google. Again, I believe this is on by default. So if you're wanting to send it wider and to all sorts of other people, you'd probably untick this and do this in conjunction with collecting responder input for the email address if you want to have it as a non-anonymous form. And a fairly obvious setting here, limit to one response. If we limit to one response, they can fill it in once, never again. If we toggle it on, again, then respondents are required to sign into Google because it doesn't track by IP address. So if we didn't have this on and people weren't signed into accounts, so if we had this off, then people could go into a private browser and go and fill it in again and so on and so on. So if we want to have really clean data and limit to just response, we enable it, but it will mean that people will need to sign into Google so that it can check that they haven't filled it in before. As I said, it doesn't check IP addresses. Okay. So again, I'm happy with this for now. The next section is presentation. What can we do in terms of the presentation and how responses are presented? So one really useful feature that I tend to enable for all my forms, no matter how short they are, is show the progress bar. So I'm going to enable that and show you how that looks. There we go. We've got a little blue bar at the bottom here that's giving me an indication of how much further I've got to go through this form. So we're not cloak and dagger in it and, giving them a 45-minute form with no progress bar and they think they're close to the end, but they're really not. This gives a really nice, clear indication of how far I am through the form. So again, anything you can do to make this easier for your audience is better. Shuffle question order, only really useful if you're using a quiz and you're looking to check learning, otherwise very confusing. The last option here is that appears at the end of the form is confirmation message. So when we fill in the form, there's a default message, your response has been recorded, but if we wanted to customize that to send them somewhere else to say, thank you, now go and visit this practical guide on cheeses, then we could add a deeper message in here. The annoying thing about this is links can't be done as meaningful hyperlinks. What I mean by that is we can't do like a see our practical guide and have that in a nice link. It will do it as that horrible big URL. So sometimes it's nicer to have that in the actual form itself at the end, like in a section at its end, have a submission point section to say, thank you. To submit your responses, hit the submit button. We recommend you now go to, and then have your nice meaningful hyperlinks in there for practical guides, for further guidance and so on. But again, if you want to customize your confirmation message, you can. Again, show link to submit another response. This is only enabled if we are not limiting it to just one response. If we're limiting it to just one response, then of course, there's no option to submit another response. So that won't appear. But all this means is if we're saying you can submit it more than once, then they'll have a little link at the bottom that says, now you can submit another time. View results summary. This is very important to know about in terms of data protection. So when I enable this setting, what it means is if I sent this out to everyone, you could see a summary of the results. You could see who likes cheese, who doesn't like cheese. And in this instance, that's okay because, well, liking cheese or not liking cheese is not a protected characteristic at this stage. It's just fine to share that with the world. But if we were collecting data on people's ethnicity, if we were collecting anything that is sensitive, okay, then this is a really dangerous setting to enable because then we're allowing anyone that fills in the form to actually see the results of that. They can't see individual responses. They can't see, if Simon filled this in, they couldn't see just Simon's cheese preferences, but it does allow that that kind of top level view of the data. So it is something to be cautious of if you are collecting sensitive data. If in doubt, just keep it off. But yeah. And if you're feeling really mean, you could disable autosave for all respondents and say, no, you've got to do it in this one attempt. More useful if you're doing a quiz, like a timed quiz to be done in that period of time. But again, a bit mean for just filling in forms because you want people to be able to, finish it off later if they just forget. Okay, so those are all the things that live under our settings there. These defaults I would advise staying away from because you can actually, if you change your collect email addresses by default to verified and you forget and you want to change it, then all your forms will be set to this, all new forms, will be set to these default settings. I would save it as just as it is for now. Collect email addresses by default, do not collect, and turn it on as and when. And if you've enabled this, then you're saying that every single question on new forms you create will be required by default. They'll be mandatory by default. So not that useful. They're there if you want, but not super useful. Okay. So that's our settings. So look, we're pretty happy with this form. We know it's working well. Let's send it out into the world to find out people's cheese preferences. Now, this has been made a lot easier in Google, but previously what it used to have is share and send here. It used to be a bit confusing because people would share the form thinking that was how people fill it in. What you're actually doing then is sharing people to collaborate on it, which is on the three-dot menu, and add collaborators. When we add people here, it's just like we'd have with Google Docs and other workspace items. We can allow general access, so anyone with the link can edit this. That's really dangerous because then I'm saying everyone that's got this form can go and edit it. I could send it out and they'll see that pencil icon in the bottom to go and change all my cheese questions and to see everyone's responses. What this setting here is doing is sharing the edit version of the form. So this is only for collaboration. Again, if we set everyone at the University of York can edit, it's dangerous again. So we want to keep that general access. I can't think of any other reason we wouldn't keep that general access to anything other than restricted. But again, I can add separate people here. So we could add more people and we could allow them to be an editor. We could add an expiry. But again, this is just for collaboration. So just be very careful that you are not sending your form out to be filled in as a collaborator because that can lead to severe data breaches. And we've had that and it's a very serious situation. So what we want to do to send this out into the world is the large purple send button. They've tried to make it easier for us. So when we go to send, we've got a couple of options we can do here. Again, we can change our collect email addresses up here if we want to, but the first option here is send via email. So I could add a mailing list here. I could add a Google group here, and I can add a subject to the email that's going to be sent to them. So It could be cheese survey, I can edit that. I can edit the body of the message. By default, that is, I've invited you to fill in a form, but if you want to be a bit less generic, you could add something a bit more personalized there, you know, like a nice email. And you can also include the form in email, which is really useful for people. It will give them the form directly in the email, so they don't have to click out, they can just fill it in from the email. So that is a nice way of sending it out. I'd say the way that most forms are sent out these days is via the link here. So this link here is just like just a link, just a hyperlink. And we can shorten it if we want to make it a little bit clearer, a little bit easier. And I'm going to copy and paste that now. And I'm going to send that into the chat ready for people to pop in responses. So please do feel free to give us some responses to this cheese survey there. And we can see what's going on with the responses. The last option is embed. This is really only if you're looking to embed it on a web page or something like that. It's rarely used by people. Google Sites, you can embed it directly from the Google Sites. The main ways people are sending things out are the link and by mail. But again, you know, be cautious of spamming people. You could add tons of people here and send it over and over and over. But that's not the best etiquette in the world. So yeah. Now, let's see what's going on with these responses. So here I am in my editor again, and I can see, whoa, look at that. People are very speedy here. People are filling in my responses. So I'm going to go to the responses tab and let's see what's going on there. So as people fill this in, I can see we've got 100% cheese liking success rate, which is fairly unsurprising. But I'm getting some really nice, simple data analytics out of this directly in Google Forms. I could copy this chart, put it into a Word doc, put it into a Google doc, put it into a slide deck. I don't have to go and do any advanced analysis at this stage. If I don't have to, I've got this lovely chart here. I can also cycle through and scroll down. I can see we've got a nice breakdown of, wow, some exotic cheeses here. Brie's winning out just by a nose at the moment. But look at this, we've got some data validation. So if we want to clean up our data, we've got Brie here, capitalized, Brie non-capitalized. So would we want to go and do some tidying up of that in our data validation if we're really looking for analysis? Maybe. Gives us some good insights. But yeah, I can scroll through and I can see these different responses and different charts, and that's lovely. I can even go and see by question what's happening. So I can toggle through my different questions to see who likes cheese and see all the responses here. I can see individual responses. So I could look at if I was collecting email addresses and I wanted to see each response by person, I could do that here. Really useful for quick analytics, but where this really comes into its own is when we link it to a Google Sheet, because this is updating in real time and we know that these things work live. If I link this to Sheets, I'll be able to see these responses come in live through a spreadsheet. So let's hit link to Sheets. And the first time we can do this within an existing spreadsheet, or we could just create a new spreadsheet, which is going to be easier in this instance. I'm going to create that. Give it a second to think about it. And let's view it in Sheets. Let's see what's going on here live. There we go. I can do all my analysis here in my sheet. I can filter, I can sort, I can add tables. If someone was to put in a response now, wink, wink, we'd be able to see that appear live as it happens. If we had this embedded in a Google Sites, it would update automatically there. If we had charts in here, those would update automatically as well. So it's really useful for real-time analysis. You don't have to touch it again. You can just let it tick over. So we'll be able to see responses coming in live here. We can, if we go back here, we can delete responses if we want to. So we can go to individual responses and delete that. We can also turn off whether we're accepting responses or not. Now, this is a manual trigger. Unfortunately, we can't do this in a sort of a timed way. We can't say stop collecting after this date. You have to set yourself a little reminder to go in and toggle this off, and then it will basically shut down the form so it's no longer accepting responses. So do be aware of that. Another thing that's really useful here is actually in the three-dot menu under responses is getting email notifications for new responses. If you've got an important form where you're looking to see when responses come in, if you toggle this little notification here, then whoever's account this was set up by, we can get email notifications for those new responders. Really useful if you're just wanting to see what happens in real time. We can select a destination so we can move it around. We can unlink the form if we don't want it linked anymore to that spreadsheet. We can delete everything if we want to just go back from scratch. We can download our responses into a .csv file. There are tons of options here, but it is really useful to be able to link in Sheets. Now, we haven't gone through Sheets massively today, but what I will say is next week, there is the last week, actually, the week 5 of the Essential Spreadsheets course. Now, that is a 5-week course, but next week is the last week, and it's kind of the play around week, isn't it, Simon? So it's one where people can kind of come in with their own questions and just have a play around. So what we're going to do is in the post-session email, we're going to send out the Zoom link to that session. So if anyone wants to join in and ask some specific questions about data analysis in Sheets, you're more than welcome to join that. But we'll have the information on that when it's running again. In terms of day and time for that next week, I believe that's on Tuesday, starting at 1 o'clock, finishing at 3 o'clock next week. Is that correct, Simon?
Yeah, that's right. And like I say, even though it's technically week 5 of the spreadsheets course, it's the standalone session where anyone can just turn up and ask stuff. So yeah, you don't need to sign up or anything. Feel free to just come along.
Lovely. Now that is our whistle-stop tour of Google Forms, but as always, we've got loads of extra guidance available on this, and I'm going to make the recording available to you all with chapters so you can skip to the bits that you can't quite remember or the bits that were most relevant to you. We have an entire guide on data, a practical guide on data. There is a specific section on survey tools there. So if you want to have a little look at slides and things like that and try some exercises, or if you're just this kind of learner, then by all means, have a little look at that, and we'll send that out afterwards. We've also got our 10 steps to less annoying forms and surveys. So we've been sprinkling in some tips throughout the session, but by all means, please have a look at this as well, and yeah, have a little scroll through some tips to avoid spamming people, considering your participants and so on. Anything else? I think that's about us. Oh, one more thing I will mention. If you are already au fait with Google Forms and you are thinking it's a bit on the light side, next week we have a bite-sized session on Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a far more advanced survey platform. You don't always need to use it, but it's got more question types, more logic. It's altogether more. So if you think this is going to be, that might be useful to you if you're going to be a survey maker from here on, then feel free to come to that. That is next Thursday at 1 o'clock. I will drop the link to that in the post-session email as well.